story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Derek Stone had always prided himself on reading people. 12 years in Army Special Operations had taught him to spot deception from a mile away, to notice the subtle tells that revealed when someone was lying, planning, or about to betray. Yet somehow, he'd missed the signs in his own home for months. The 38-year-old security consultant sat in his black Tahoe outside the Whitmore estate, watching through the ornate windows as his wife Victoria laughed with her tennis instructor, Trevor Ashford. Their body language told a story Derek's trained eye could no longer ignore. The way Trevor's hand lingered on Victoria's lower back during their lesson, how she leaned into him when she thought no one was watching, the intimate whispers that had nothing to do with backhand techniques. Derek had built his life with military precision after leaving the service 5 years ago. His security firm, Apex Protection, specialized in high-profile clients who needed more than standard corporate security. Politicians, celebrities, CEOs, people with secrets worth protecting and enemies worth neutralizing. He was good at what he did, very good, which is how he'd met Victoria at a charity gala where he was providing security. Victoria Whitmore came from old money, the kind that traced back 4 generations in Charleston. Her family owned textile mills, real estate, and had their fingers in half the city's major developments. She was beautiful in that polished, untouchable way that attracted men like moths to flame. Derek had been different. He hadn't chased her. Maybe that's what caught her attention initially. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Victoria was 29, he was 33, and she claimed she was tired of the spoiled rich boys her mother constantly paraded in front of her. She wanted someone real, someone who'd actually accomplished something beyond inheriting money. Derek's decorated military record and growing business impressed even Eleanor Whitmore, Victoria's formidable mother, though she made it clear Derek would always be beneath their social standing. The marriage had been good for 3 years. Victoria had seemed genuinely happy, and Derek had even started to believe he belonged in her world of country clubs and charity galas. He'd softened his edges, traded his tactical gear for tailored suits, learned to navigate society dinners and political fundraisers. He thought they were building something together. But Derek's instincts, honed by years of combat and survival, began picking up anomalies 6 months ago. Victoria's phone habits changed. She'd take calls in other rooms, smile at texts she wouldn't share, claim work dinners that lasted until midnight. She'd started going to the country club more frequently, always mentioning how her tennis game was improving under Trevor's guidance. Trevor Ashford was everything Derek wasn't, a 35-year-old pretty boy who'd never worked a real day in his life. His family had money too, though not Whitmore-level wealth, and he'd parlayed his college tennis career into a comfortable living giving lessons to bored housewives. He was smooth, charming, and exactly the type of man Derek had seen Victoria with before they met. Tonight, Derek had confirmed what he already knew. The listening device he'd planted in Victoria's car had captured everything. Her phone calls with Trevor planning their weekend getaway, their explicit conversations about their affair, and worst of all, their discussions about Derek himself. He's so serious all the time. Victoria's voice had crackled through his earpiece earlier. Everything's about work and security and being responsible. Trevor, you make me feel alive again, like I did before I settled. Your mother was right about him, Trevor had replied. He's not really your type, Vic. You need someone who understands your world, who can give you the life you deserve. Derek's jaw had clenched as he listened to them discuss him like he was an inconvenience, a mistake Victoria had made that could be corrected. They talked about divorce, about the prenup Derek had foolishly signed, about how Victoria's family lawyers would ensure he got nothing. But they didn't know Derek Stone. They'd seen the polished version he'd presented for 3 years, the man who wore suits and smiled at charity functions. They'd never met the operative who'd infiltrated terrorist cells, who'd planned and executed missions that stayed classified, who'd learned that the most devastating attacks came from angles the enemy never saw coming. As Derek watched Trevor's Porsche pull away from the estate, he made a decision. Victoria and Trevor wanted to play games. They wanted to treat him like he didn't matter, like he was just an obstacle to remove. He'd show them what happened when you betrayed Derek Stone. The next morning, Derek maintained his usual routine. Coffee at 5:30 a.m., workout in their home gym, shower, and breakfast with Victoria as she prepared for another day of what she called charity work, but he now knew was really time with Trevor. Good morning, beautiful, he said, kissing her cheek as she scrolled through her phone at the kitchen island. Victoria barely looked up. Morning. I've got tennis at 10, then lunch with the foundation board. I'll be home late. We're planning the fall gala. Derek nodded, buttering his toast with calm precision. Trevor still working with you on your serve? Victoria murmured, not catching the edge in his voice. He says I'm improving rapidly. I'm sure you are. Derek's smile was cold, but Victoria was too absorbed in her phone to notice. I'll be at the office most of the day. New client wants a full security assessment. After Victoria left, Derek sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of the life he'd built. Military commendations on the walls, photos from his wedding, certificates from his security firm. All of it felt like a lie now, a costume he'd worn while his wife made a fool of him. But Derek Stone didn't get mad. He got methodical. He opened his laptop and began to work. First, he needed intelligence, real intelligence, not just confirmation of the affair. He needed to understand Victoria and Trevor's routines, their vulnerabilities, their pressure points. He needed to know who they talked to, what they cared about, what they feared losing. This wasn't going to be a crime of passion or a simple confrontation. This was going to be warfare, and Derek Stone had never lost a war. Chapter 2. Intelligence Gathering. 3 weeks into his covert operation, Derek had assembled a comprehensive dossier on his targets. His home office had transformed into a command center, though he was careful to maintain the appearance of normal business operations. His legitimate clients provided perfect cover for his activities. Surveillance equipment, background checks, and intelligence gathering were all part of his daily work. Trevor Ashford was even more pathetic than Derek had initially assessed. The man had never held a real job, living off a trust fund his grandfather had established and supplementing it with tennis lessons for wealthy women. His apartment in downtown Charleston was paid for by his family, his Porsche was leased through his father's business, and he owed money to several high-end establishments around the city. More importantly, Trevor had a gambling problem. Derek had discovered the man's weekly poker games with some unsavory characters who operated out of a warehouse near the docks. Trevor was into them for nearly $50,000, a fact he'd carefully hidden from everyone in his social circle, including Victoria. Victoria's secrets ran deeper than Derek had imagined. While she played the dutiful daughter and socialite wife, she'd been skimming money from 3 different charity organizations she helped manage. Nothing major, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, but enough to fund her expensive shopping habits and weekend getaways with Trevor. She was careful, using her access to redirect small amounts into accounts her mother didn't monitor. But the most valuable intelligence Derek had gathered came from an unexpected source. Margaret Shun, Eleanor Whitmore's personal assistant for the past 15 years. Margaret had watched Victoria grow up, had seen her previous affairs, and had grown increasingly disgusted with the family's treatment of Derek. Your wife has always been selfish, Margaret had confided during what appeared to be a chance encounter at a coffee shop near Derek's office. But you've been good to her, good to the family. What she's doing now, it's wrong. Margaret had been more helpful than she probably realized. She'd confirmed that Eleanor was actively encouraging Victoria's affair, seeing Trevor as a more suitable match for her daughter. The Whitmore matriarch had never accepted Derek, despite his military service and successful business. To Eleanor, he would always be common, a man who'd married above his station. Mrs. Whitmore has been planning this for months, Margaret had revealed. She's had the family lawyers reviewing your prenup, looking for ways to minimize what Victoria would have to pay in a divorce. She talks about you like your hired help who's overstayed his welcome. Derek had smiled and thanked Margaret for the coffee, but inside, his rage had crystallized into something harder and more focused. The Whitmores thought they could discard him like a broken toy, humiliate him, and send him away with nothing. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That evening, Derek executed the first phase of his plan. Using techniques he'd learned in military intelligence, he'd gained access to Trevor's email accounts, banking records, and social media. Trevor's password security was laughably weak. He used variations of his college tennis trophies and his mother's maiden name for everything. Derek began planting seeds of destruction throughout Trevor's digital life. A few altered bank statements here, some modified email exchanges there, nothing dramatic enough to be immediately noticed, but enough to create problems down the line. He also began documenting every financial transaction between Trevor and his gambling associates. building a comprehensive record of the man's debts and the increasingly threatening messages he was receiving. For Victoria, Derek's approach was more subtle. He began intercepting her communications with the charity organizations, carefully documenting her financial irregularities. He also started creating doubt in her relationship with Trevor, using spoofed messages and altered communications to make it appear that Trevor was interested in other women. The beauty of psychological warfare was that the targets often destroyed themselves once the right pressure was applied. Derek's opportunity to accelerate his timeline came when Victoria announced she was going on a girls' weekend to Hilton Head with her college roommates. Derek's surveillance confirmed she was actually planning a romantic getaway with Trevor at a luxury resort. They'd booked separate rooms but planned to spend the weekend together, away from prying eyes. This gave Derek the perfect window to execute phase 2 of his operation. On Friday afternoon, Derek called in a favor from his military days. Marcus Rivera had served with Derek in Afghanistan and now worked private security in Atlanta. More importantly, Marcus specialized in the kind of operations that required plausible deniability. "I need a favor, hermano," Derek had said during their encrypted call. "Nothing permanent, nothing that leaves marks, but I need someone to have a very educational conversation with a gambling addict who thinks he's untouchable." Marcus had chuckled. "How educational are we talking?" "Educational enough that he understands his situation has changed. Educational enough that he realizes he's been playing in a much more dangerous game than he thought." While Victoria and Trevor were at their romantic getaway, Derek implemented his plan. Marcus and 2 associates paid Trevor's apartment a visit, not to harm him, but to conduct a thorough search and plant several items that would prove problematic later. They also left evidence that Trevor's gambling debts had been sold to a much more serious collection agency, one that didn't negotiate payment plans. For Victoria, Derek's approach was more psychological. He arranged for her to receive a series of anonymous messages at the resort, photos of Trevor with other women, financial records showing his gambling debts, and documents suggesting he was only interested in her for her money. The messages were carefully crafted to make Victoria question everything about her relationship with Trevor without revealing Derek's involvement. By Sunday evening, when Victoria returned from her weekend, she was visibly shaken. Trevor had spent most of the weekend on his phone, dealing with what he claimed were business emergencies, but which Victoria now suspected were other women. The anonymous messages had done their work, planting seeds of doubt and paranoia. Derek greeted his wife at the door with flowers and a warm smile. "How was your weekend with the girls? You look tired." Victoria's response was distant, distracted. "It was fine. Just a lot of drama. You know how women can be when they get together." That night, as Victoria lay in bed beside him, Derek could practically hear her mind racing. She was beginning to question Trevor, beginning to wonder if the man she'd been risking her marriage for was worth the gamble. But Derek wasn't done. This was just the beginning. Chapter 3: The Trap Springs. 2 days after Victoria's return from Hilton Head, Derek received a call that accelerated his timeline dramatically. Margaret Chin's voice was urgent as she whispered into her phone from Eleanor Whitmore's study. "They're moving faster than expected," Margaret said. "Mrs. Whitmore called the lawyers this morning. She wants Victoria to file for divorce by the end of the week. She's convinced Victoria that you're having an affair with your secretary." Derek's grip tightened on his phone. He didn't have a secretary, but Eleanor was crafty enough to manufacture evidence if needed. "What else?" "There's going to be a family dinner Thursday night. Mrs. Whitmore plans to confront you then, publicly humiliate you in front of the extended family. She's invited Victoria's cousins, her brother, even some family friends. She wants witnesses to your disgrace." Derek smiled coldly. Perfect. Eleanor Whitmore wanted a public spectacle? She'd get one, just not the kind she was expecting. "Margaret, I need you to do something for me. Can you make sure the dinner is recorded? Tell Mrs. Whitmore you want to document the family gathering for posterity." "I can do that," Margaret replied. "Mr. Stone, what are you planning?" "Justice," Derek replied simply. Wednesday evening, Derek put the final pieces of his plan into motion. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, and everything had to execute flawlessly. The psychological pressure he'd applied to Victoria and Trevor was showing results. Victoria had been distant and suspicious, while Trevor was increasingly paranoid about his gambling debts and the mysterious collection agency that had been leaving threatening messages. Derek made 3 phone calls that evening. The first was to Detective Ray Morrison, an old Army buddy who now worked Charleston PD. The second was to IRS Criminal Investigation Division, reporting suspicious financial activity at several local charities. The third was to a journalist named Amy Walsh who specialized in exposing corruption among Charleston's elite families. Each call was carefully timed, each piece of evidence delivered anonymously but verifiably. Derek had learned in the military that the most effective operations used official channels and legitimate authorities to achieve their objectives. Why get your hands dirty when you could let the system do the work for you? Thursday arrived with unseasonable humidity that made the evening air thick and oppressive. Derek dressed carefully for the family dinner. His best suit, his military dress watch, his wedding ring still firmly in place. He looked every inch the successful businessman, the decorated veteran, the devoted husband. The Whitmore estate was full of relatives and family friends when Derek arrived. Victoria's cousins from Atlanta, her brother Robert and his wife, several prominent Charleston families who'd known the Whitmores for generations. Eleanor had indeed planned this as a public execution. Derek moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting everyone warmly, playing the role of devoted son-in-law. He noticed Victoria watching him nervously from across the room. Trevor nowhere to be seen. Good. His psychological warfare was working. Eleanor Whitmore presided over the gathering like a queen holding court. She was a formidable woman in her early 70s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing diamonds that probably cost more than most people's houses. She'd been beautiful once, and Victoria had inherited her fine bone structure. But Eleanor's beauty had curdled into something cold and calculating over the years. "Derek, dear," Eleanor called out as the family gathered in the formal dining room. "So glad you could make it. We have some important family matters to discuss tonight." Derek took his seat beside Victoria, noting how she avoided eye contact. Around the table sat 12 people, all of them about to witness what Eleanor believed would be Derek's humiliation and banishment from the family. Margaret Chin stood discreetly in the corner, a small camera recording everything as requested. Eleanor rose from her seat, wine glass in hand, and Derek could see the predatory satisfaction in her eyes. This was the moment she'd been planning for months. "Family," Eleanor began. "We gather tonight because sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the good of everyone involved." Her gaze fixed on Derek with Arctic coldness. "We've discovered some troubling information about Derek's activities. Infidelity, inappropriate relationships with employees, financial irregularities in his business." The lies rolled off her tongue smoothly, and Derek could see Victoria's relatives shifting uncomfortably. They'd known this was coming. Eleanor had briefed them beforehand. "Therefore," Eleanor continued, building to her crescendo, "we're cutting all dead weight." She pointed directly at Derek with theatrical drama. "You're finished here. Pack your loser life and leave." Victoria, right on cue, added her own venom. "And I'm filing for divorce. You deserve nothing." The room fell silent, everyone staring at Derek, waiting for his reaction. Eleanor smiled triumphantly, believing she'd delivered the killing blow. Derek sat quietly for a moment, then slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Instead of the resignation letter or begging plea Eleanor expected, he withdrew his phone. "Interesting timing," Derek said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Because I just received a call from Detective Morrison at Charleston PD. It seems they've received some very detailed information about financial irregularities at the Charleston Children's Foundation, the Historic Preservation Society, and the Arts Council." He looked directly at Victoria, who had gone pale. "3 organizations where someone has been embezzling funds for the past 2 years. Victoria's wine glass trembled in her hand. Derek continued, his voice never rising but somehow commanding the room's attention. "They've also received information about an illegal gambling operation downtown, including detailed records of everyone involved and their outstanding debts." He smiled at the empty chair where Trevor should have been sitting. "Speaking of which, where is Trevor tonight, Victoria? I heard he had some unexpected visitors this week." Eleanor's confident expression was cracking. "What are you talking about? What visitors?" "Oh, didn't Victoria tell you? Trevor's gambling debts were sold to some very serious people. The kind who don't send polite reminder notices." Derek's smile was cold as winter steel. I also find it interesting that the IRS received an anonymous tip about unreported income and tax evasion involving several prominent Charleston families. The color drained from Eleanor's face as the implications hit her. Derek stood slowly, straightening his jacket. You want to know about infidelity, Eleanor? About inappropriate relationships? He looked around the table at Victoria's relatives, all of whom were starting to realize this wasn't going according to plan. I have 6 months of recorded conversations, photographs, hotel receipts, and financial records documenting Victoria's affair with Trevor Ashford. I also have evidence of your encouragement and planning of this entire scenario. Victoria's brother Robert spoke up nervously. Derek, maybe we should all calm down and discuss this privately. No. Derek cut him off sharply. Eleanor wanted a public confrontation, so let's have one. You wanted to humiliate me in front of the family? Let's talk about humiliation. Derek pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through photos. Here's Victoria and Trevor at the oceanfront resort last month. Here they are at his apartment on 17 different occasions. Here are the financial records showing Victoria's systematic theft from 3 charities. He set the tablet on the table where everyone could see. And here are the text messages between Victoria and Trevor discussing how they plan to destroy me in the divorce and take everything I've worked for. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Victoria's cousins were staring at her in horror, while Robert was trying to process what he was hearing. Eleanor found her voice, but it was shakier now. You're lying. You're making this up because you're desperate. Derek's laugh was genuinely amused. Eleanor, I spent 12 years in Army Special Operations. I know how to gather intelligence, how to build cases, and how to destroy enemies. Did you really think I'd sit quietly while you and your daughter played your little games? He walked around the table slowly, like a predator circling wounded prey. You called me dead weight, Eleanor. You said I was finished. But here's what's actually finished. Victoria's access to the charity funds she's been stealing. Trevor's comfortable lifestyle funded by his family's money. And your family's reputation when all of this becomes public. Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. Derek, please, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be like this. Derek turned to face his wife, and everyone in the room could see the cold fury in his eyes. Work it out? Like you worked it out when you decided to betray me? When you and your mother planned to humiliate me and steal everything I've built? He leaned down so he was eye level with Victoria. You wanted a divorce, darling? Congratulations. You'll get one, but not the kind you planned. You see, I recorded this entire evening's conversation, including your mother's accusations and your own admissions. This will make excellent evidence in court, especially combined with the evidence of your adultery and theft. Eleanor was scrambling now, trying to regain control. You can't prove any of this. It's all speculation, and Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Actually, I can prove all of it. That was Detective Morrison. They've just arrested Trevor Ashford on charges related to illegal gambling operations. Apparently, when they searched his apartment, they found some very interesting financial documents and evidence of other criminal activities. The room fell dead silent. Derek straightened his tie and looked around the table one final time. You gave me an hour to pack, Eleanor. How generous. But I think I'll take my time. After all, I have a divorce to prepare for, evidence to catalog, and a reputation to rebuild after your groundless accusations. He smiled coldly. Oh, and Victoria? You might want to call a criminal defense attorney. The IRS tends to take charity fraud very seriously. As Derek walked toward the door, the room behind him erupted in chaos. Victoria was crying, Eleanor was shouting, and the relatives were demanding explanations. But Derek didn't look back. He had work to do. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 4, The Counterstrike. The next morning, Derek's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. News traveled fast in Charleston's elite circles, especially when it involved scandal, arrests, and the IRS. By the time Derek had finished his morning workout, he'd received calls from 3 different attorneys, 2 journalists, and Margaret Shen. Mr. Stone, Margaret's voice was breathless with excitement. The police came to the house this morning. They have a search warrant for Mrs. Victoria's financial records and computer files. Mrs. Whitmore is beside herself. Derek smiled as he prepared his coffee with military precision. I imagine she is. What about Victoria? She's locked herself in her room and won't come out. Her mother has been screaming at her all morning, demanding to know how much evidence you actually have. Tell me, Margaret, after 15 years with the family, do you think they deserve what's happening to them? There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice came back stronger. Mr. Stone, I've watched that family destroy good people for years. You're the first one who ever fought back. Derek's second call came from his attorney, Patricia Voss, a sharp-minded divorce lawyer who specialized in high-net-worth cases. They'd been acquaintances through his security work, and she'd agreed to represent him after one phone call. Derek, I've reviewed the evidence you sent over. This is a prosecutor's dream case. Between the adultery documentation, the financial theft, and the recorded conversations from last night, Victoria's legal position is essentially hopeless. What about the prenup? Derek asked. With evidence of adultery and criminal activity, it's worthless. In fact, given the charity fraud charges that are likely coming, Victoria might end up owing you money. Patricia's voice carried a note of professional satisfaction. They tried to ambush you, but you came prepared for war. Derek's third call was less pleasant. Eleanor Whitmore's voice crackled through his phone, filled with rage and desperation. You bastard. You've destroyed my daughter, destroyed our family. Eleanor, I didn't destroy anything. I simply revealed what you and Victoria had already destroyed: your integrity, your honesty, your marriage vows. Derek's voice was calm, clinical. You wanted to play hardball with a man you thought was weak. Now you're learning what happens when you underestimate your opponent. We can make a deal, Eleanor said, her voice shifting to attempted negotiation. Money, property, whatever you want. Just make this go away. Derek's laugh was cold as Arctic wind. Make it go away? Eleanor, you stood in front of your entire family and called me dead weight. You orchestrated a public humiliation designed to destroy my reputation and steal my assets. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Please, Derek. Victoria made a mistake, but she's still your wife. Victoria stopped being my wife the moment she betrayed me. And you stopped being family the moment you decided to destroy me. Derek's voice hardened. You wanted war, Eleanor. Now you have it. That afternoon, Derek received an unexpected visitor at his office. Trevor Ashford sat in his reception area, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The man who'd been so confident, so smooth when stealing another man's wife, now looked broken and desperate. Derek let him wait for an hour before agreeing to see him. Trevor stumbled into Derek's office, his usual polish completely gone. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his hands shook as he spoke. You did this, Trevor said without preamble. The gambling charges, the search warrant, the collection agency, it was all you. Derek leaned back in his chair, studying Trevor like a biologist examining an interesting specimen. I did what, Trevor? Exposed your illegal gambling? Revealed your debts? Documented your affair with my wife? He smiled coldly. I didn't create any of that. I simply brought it to light. Those weren't real collection agents. That was you, your people. Can you prove that? Derek asked mildly. Because right now, you have much bigger problems. The police found some very interesting things in your apartment yesterday. Financial records, communication with bookies, evidence of other indiscretions. Trevor's face went white. What other indiscretions? Derek opened a file on his desk, pretending to review it. Let's see. There's Mrs. Patterson from the country club. Mrs. Hendricks from the yacht club. Oh, and that interesting relationship with Judge Morrison's wife. He looked up at Trevor with mock concern. Did you really think Victoria was your only client-turned-lover? You have a pattern, Trevor, and patterns are evidence. You're lying. Am I? Because I have photographs, Trevor. Hotels receipts. Text messages. You've been running quite the operation, haven't you? Seducing wealthy married women, documenting their affairs. Then what? Were you planning to blackmail them? Or just move from one to the next when you got bored? Trevor's silence was answer enough. Derek stood and walked to his window, looking out at Charleston's historic district. Here's what's going to happen, Trevor. You're going to plead guilty to the gambling charges. You're going to admit to your affair with Victoria in court. And you're going to disappear from Charleston permanently. And if I don't, Derek turned back to face him, and Trevor saw something in Derek's eyes that made him shrink back in his chair. If you don't, then all of your other affairs become public knowledge. Every woman, every hotel, every sordid detail. How do you think Judge Morrison will react when he learns about you and his wife? How about Mr. Patterson, who owns half the construction companies in the city? Trevor's voice was barely a whisper. You'd destroy innocent people just to get to me? Innocent. Derek's laugh was harsh. Trevor, you've been destroying marriages and families for years. I'm just holding you accountable. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But if you're worried about innocent people getting hurt, then make the smart choice. Take the plea deal, admit your crimes, and leave town. Otherwise, your little black book becomes front-page news. After Trevor left, Derek allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 3 of his operation was proceeding perfectly. Trevor would take the plea deal. He had no choice. Victoria would face criminal charges for the charity fraud, and Eleanor would watch her family's reputation crumble in real time. But Derek wasn't finished. Not even close. That evening, he had dinner at the Charleston Country Club, the same place where he'd first met Victoria 5 years ago. He sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey, and watched the social dynamics play out around him. Word of the scandal was spreading through Charleston's elite circles like wildfire, and Derek could see the careful distances people were maintaining from anything connected to the Whitmore family. Amy Walsh, the investigative journalist Derek had contacted, approached him at the bar. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fearless reporting. "Mr. Stone? I'm Amy Walsh from the Post and Courier. I was hoping we could talk." Derek gestured to the empty seat beside him. "About what, Ms. Walsh?" "About the allegations against your wife and mother-in-law. About Trevor Ashford's arrest. About what's really happening with one of Charleston's most prominent families." Derek smiled slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean. I'm just a man dealing with a difficult divorce." Amy pulled out a small recording device. "May I?" Derek nodded, and she pressed record. "Mr. Stone, sources tell me you have extensive evidence of financial fraud, adultery, and other criminal activities involving the Whitmore family. Care to comment?" Derek was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at Amy. "Ms. Walsh, I've spent my entire adult life serving my country and building legitimate businesses. When I married Victoria Whitmore, I thought I was joining a family that shared those values. I was wrong." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some people believe wealth and social status put them above the law, above common decency, above the consequences of their actions." Derek's voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of steel. "They're about to learn otherwise. Are you saying you orchestrated their downfall?" Derek's smile was enigmatic. "I'm saying that truth has a way of coming to light, especially when people make the mistake of underestimating those they've wronged." The interview would run in tomorrow's paper, Derek knew. It would be the first of many stories as the scandal unfolded. Charleston loved nothing more than watching the mighty fall, and the Whitmores were about to provide the entertainment of the decade. As Derek left the country club that night, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." V. Derek deleted the message without responding. Victoria had made her choice, and now she would live with the consequences. He'd warned her once about betraying him, back when they were happy, back when he thought their marriage meant something. "I don't forgive betrayal," he'd told her then, joking about his military training. "It's not in my nature." She'd laughed it off, thinking it was just tough guy talk from her soldier husband. Now she was learning he'd been deadly serious. Chapter 5. The Reckoning Accelerates. 3 days after Amy Walsh's article hit the front page of the Charleston Post and Courier, Derek's world shifted dramatically. The headline, "Decorated Veteran Fights Back Against Elite Family's Betrayal," had turned him from a potential victim into a folk hero overnight. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from supporters, fellow veterans, and people who'd had their own run-ins with Charleston's old money families. But the most important call came from Detective Ray Morrison at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. "Derek, we need to talk. Not as friends, officially. Can you come down to the station?" Derek arrived at Charleston PD an hour later, dressed in his best suit and accompanied by Patricia Voss. They were led to an interview room where Detective Morrison waited with another officer Derek didn't recognize. "Derek Stone," Morrison began formally, "we're investigating allegations that you may have interfered with an ongoing criminal investigation, specifically involving Trevor Ashford's arrest and the evidence found in his apartment." Patricia leaned forward. "What exactly are you alleging, Detective?" "We're not alleging anything yet," the unknown officer replied. "I'm Detective Sarah Kim, Internal Affairs. We've received complaints that Mr. Stone may have planted evidence, coerced witnesses, or manipulated our investigation." Derek remained calm, having expected this moment. "From whom did you receive these complaints?" "Eleanor Whitmore and her attorney. Detective Kim replied. They claim you orchestrated the entire investigation to frame innocent people. Derek's laugh was genuinely amused. Innocent people? Detective, do you have evidence that the financial records we provided were falsified? That the photographs of Victoria and Trevor were doctored? That the recorded conversations were fabricated? No, Morrison admitted reluctantly. All the evidence has been verified as authentic. Then what exactly are we discussing? Patricia interjected. My client discovered criminal activity and reported it to the appropriate authorities. Since when is that a crime? Detective Kim pulled out a file. Mr. Stone, we've been investigating your movements over the past month. You've used your security credentials to access databases, conduct surveillance, and gather information about private citizens. Some of your methods were questionable. Derek met her gaze steadily. Detective Kim, I'm a licensed private investigator and security consultant. Everything I did was within the bounds of my professional authority. I was investigating suspected adultery and financial crimes involving my own wife. If you have evidence that I broke any laws, please present it. The room fell silent. Derek could see Morrison's discomfort. The man knew Derek well enough to understand he wouldn't have made a move without legal cover. We also understand you may have used intimidation tactics against Mr. Ashford. Detective Kim continued. Intimidation? Derek's voice remained level. I had one conversation with Mr. Ashford in my office, with my attorney present. If he felt intimidated by being confronted with evidence of his crimes, that's not my responsibility. Patricia pulled out her own file. Detectives, my client has cooperated fully with your investigation. He's provided extensive evidence of criminal activity, all of which has been verified as authentic. If Mrs. Whitmore is unhappy about the consequences of her daughter's actions, that's her issue to resolve in divorce court, not in criminal proceedings. Detective Kim tried one more angle. Mr. Stone, did you hire anyone to confront or threaten Mr. Ashford? Any private contractors from your military background? Derek's smile was cold. Detective, if I wanted to threaten Trevor Ashford, I wouldn't need to hire anyone. I'm perfectly capable of handling such matters myself. He leaned forward slightly. But I didn't threaten him. I simply presented him with evidence of his criminal activities and suggested he might want to consider his options carefully. After 2 hours of questioning, the detectives had to admit they had no evidence of criminal wrongdoing by Derek. Everything he'd done had been legal, if professionally ruthless. The investigation was being dropped, but Derek knew this was just the beginning of Eleanor's desperation tactics. That afternoon brought news that accelerated Derek's timeline dramatically. Margaret Shin called with information that changed everything. Mr. Stone, you need to know, Mrs. Whitmore is planning to flee the country. She's been liquidating assets, closing accounts, and making arrangements to leave for Switzerland by the end of the week. Derek's grip tightened on his phone. What about Victoria? She's refusing to go? They've been fighting constantly. Mrs. Victoria knows that running would make her look guilty, and she still thinks she can salvage the situation through the courts. And the IRS investigation? They're moving faster than expected. Agent Jennifer Cole called this morning. They want to interview Mrs. Victoria tomorrow about the charity funds. Derek made 3 phone calls immediately after hanging up with Margaret. The first was to Patricia Voss, alerting her to Eleanor's flight plans. The second was to a contact at the Treasury Department who specialized in tracking international financial crimes. The third was to Amy Walsh. Ms. Walsh, how would you like an exclusive on a story that's about to get much bigger? What kind of bigger? The kind where prominent Charleston families attempt to flee the country to avoid federal prosecution. Amy's voice sharpened with interest. When and where? Charleston Executive Airport, Thursday evening. Eleanor Whitmore has a private jet scheduled to depart for Geneva at 8 p.m. I suggest you bring a photographer. That evening, Derek received an unexpected visitor at his home. Victoria stood on his doorstep, looking older than her 32 years, wearing simple clothes instead of her usual designer outfits. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked genuinely broken. Derek, please, can we talk? Against his better judgment, Derek let her in. They sat in the living room where they'd spent 3 years of marriage, surrounded by photos and mementos of their life together. I know you hate me, Victoria began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I destroyed everything, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But please, can you call off the investigation? My mother, she's not thinking clearly. She's going to run, and that will make everything worse. Derek studied his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, with clinical detachment. Victoria, your mother orchestrated a campaign to destroy me publicly, steal my assets, and humiliate me in front of your entire family. Why would I help her now? Because despite everything, you're a good man. You're better than us, better than this whole mess. Victoria's tears were real, Derek could tell. I made a terrible mistake with Trevor. I was bored, I was stupid, and I destroyed the best thing in my life. But my mother, she's 72 years old, Derek. Federal prison will kill her. Derek was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Where's Trevor now?" "Gone. He took the plea deal this morning and left Charleston. He won't be back." "And the charity money?" Victoria's voice was small. "I'll pay it all back. Every penny, with interest. I'll sell my jewelry, my car, whatever it takes." Derek stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Victoria had lovingly maintained. "Victoria, do you remember what I told you about betrayal when we first got married? You said you don't forgive it." "That's right. I don't forgive betrayal, and I don't forget it." He turned back to face her. "You and your mother declared war on me. You tried to destroy my reputation, steal my assets, and publicly humiliate me. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Please, Derek, I'm begging you." Derek's voice was flat, emotionless. "You should have thought about consequences before you betrayed me. You should have thought about your mother before you let her orchestrate this campaign. You should have thought about our marriage before you decided Trevor Ashford was worth more than the man who loved you." Victoria broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I know I destroyed everything. But please, show mercy. Be the bigger person." Derek felt nothing as he watched her cry. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd built a life with, had chosen to betray him. She'd chosen to participate in her mother's scheme to destroy him. She'd made her decision, and now she had to live with it. "Victoria, get out of my house." "Derek, please. Get out." Derek's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You made your choice. Now live with it." After Victoria left, Derek sat alone in his living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been a lie. Tomorrow, Eleanor Whitmore would attempt to flee the country. Tomorrow, the federal investigation would accelerate. Tomorrow, the scandal would reach new heights. But tonight, Derek Stone was exactly where he wanted to be, in control, with his enemies scattered and desperate, justice finally being served. The war was almost over, and Derek had won. Chapter 6. The Net Closes. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of dramatic weather that seemed fitting for the culmination of Derek's carefully orchestrated campaign. Storm clouds gathered over Charleston as Derek positioned himself in the parking garage across from Charleston Executive Airport, watching through high-powered binoculars as Eleanor Whitmore's plan unfolded. Amy Walsh and her photographer were hidden behind maintenance vehicles near the private jet terminal. Patricia Voss sat in her car with documentation ready to file emergency injunctions if needed. Detective Morrison waited in an unmarked car, though Derek suspected he wouldn't be needed. Federal agents were already moving into position. At 7:45 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled up to the private terminal. Eleanor Whitmore emerged wearing a designer travel outfit and oversized sunglasses, looking every inch the wealthy socialite departing for a European vacation. Two airport workers began loading luggage onto the jet, including what Derek knew were suitcases full of cash and bearer bonds. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Shin. She cleaned out 3 safe deposit boxes this afternoon. At least $2 million in cash and jewelry. At 7:52 p.m., just as Eleanor was walking toward the jet, federal agents surrounded the aircraft. Agent Jennifer Cole from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division approached Eleanor with a warrant, while other agents began searching the luggage. Derek watched through his binoculars as Eleanor's composed facade cracked completely. She was arguing with the agents, gesturing wildly, clearly demanding to speak with her lawyers. The photographer Amy had brought was capturing everything from multiple angles. Derek's phone rang. Patricia Voss's voice was excited. "Derek, they found over $3 million in cash and unregistered securities in her luggage. She's being arrested for money laundering, tax evasion, and attempting to flee prosecution." "What about Victoria?" "She's at the family estate with her own team of federal agents. They're executing search warrants for all the charity accounts and financial records." "This is bigger than we thought, Derek. Much bigger." As if summoned by Patricia's words, Derek's phone rang again. This time it was Detective Morrison. Derek, you need to know, the federal investigation has uncovered a lot more than charity fraud. Eleanor Whitmore has been running financial schemes through those nonprofits for over a decade. Money laundering, tax evasion, fraudulent contracts with city government. This isn't just about Victoria's affair anymore. Derek felt a moment of surprise. He'd focused on Victoria's recent thefts, but apparently Eleanor had been using the charities as fronts for much larger crimes. How much are we talking about? Preliminary estimates suggest over $15 million in fraudulent activity over the past 10 years. Derek, your wife's family isn't just wealthy, they're criminals. And your evidence broke the whole thing open. An hour later, Derek sat in his study watching the news coverage of Eleanor's arrest. The story had exploded beyond Charleston. National news networks were picking up the tale of the decorated veteran who'd exposed a massive financial conspiracy after his wife's betrayal. Derek's phone rang constantly with interview requests, book deal offers, and messages of support from fellow veterans. But the call that mattered most came at 10 p.m. from Margaret Shen. Mr. Stone, Mrs. Victoria wants to meet with you tomorrow. She says she has information that might help reduce her mother's charges, but she'll only discuss it with you. Derek considered this. Victoria was clearly desperate, looking for any way to minimize the catastrophe that had engulfed her family. But Derek was curious about what information she thought she possessed that would matter to him now. Tell her I'll meet with her at my attorney's office at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Patricia Voss will be present, and the conversation will be recorded. Yes, sir. Mr. Stone, may I say something? Of course, Margaret. In 15 years with that family, I watched them destroy people without a second thought. They treated everyone as disposable, including you. Watching them face consequences for once. It's justice, sir. Real justice. The next morning brought headlines that exceeded even Derek's expectations. Charleston socialite arrested in $15 million fraud scheme, and veterans' divorce reveals massive financial conspiracy. Derek's phone rang before 7 a.m. with calls from CNN, Fox News, and 3 major publishers interested in his story. But Derek's focus remained on the endgame. Victoria arrived at Patricia's office looking haggard and desperate, accompanied by her own attorney, a nervous-looking man named Philip Green, who clearly wished he was anywhere else. Victoria, Derek said as she sat across from him in the conference room. I understand you have information to share. Victoria's voice was barely audible. Derek, my mother, she's been using the charities to launder money for other people. Wealthy families, politicians, people who needed to hide income or move money offshore. Patricia leaned forward. What kind of people? Mayor Blackwood, for one. Senator Richardson. Judge Morrison's wife. That's why Trevor was involved with her. He was helping my mother gather information for blackmail. Victoria's hands shook as she spoke. My mother has been running Charleston's elite families like a criminal enterprise for years. Derek felt the pieces clicking into place. And you knew about this? Some of it. I thought it was just creative accounting. Tax avoidance. I never realized the scope until the federal agents started asking questions. Victoria looked directly at Derek for the first time. Derek, if I cooperate fully, if I testify against my mother and provide all the records I have access to, will you consider asking for leniency in my case? Derek's voice was ice cold. Victoria, you participated in stealing money from charities that help children, veterans, and the arts. You betrayed your marriage vows and humiliated me publicly. You participated in a scheme to destroy my reputation and steal my assets. He leaned forward. Why would I help you now? Because I'm not like her. Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. I made terrible mistakes, but I'm not a career criminal like my mother. I can help put her away for the rest of her life. Help the authorities recover millions of dollars in stolen funds. Patricia asked the practical question, what exactly are you offering? Victoria pulled out a small USB drive. Financial records going back 12 years. Bank account numbers, transaction records, communications between my mother and her clients. Everything I could access before the federal agents seized our computers. Derek studied the USB drive, then looked at Victoria. And in exchange, I want to plead guilty to the charity fraud charges and make full restitution. But I want to avoid federal prison. House arrest, community service, probation, anything but prison. Derek was quiet for several minutes, considering the offer. Victoria clearly had valuable information that could help federal prosecutors build an airtight case against Eleanor and potentially expose a much larger criminal network. But accepting her offer would mean showing mercy to someone who had betrayed him in the deepest possible way. Patricia, what's your professional opinion? Professionally, this information could be incredibly valuable to the prosecution. If Victoria's testimony helps convict Eleanor and potentially other high-profile criminals, it could significantly reduce her own sentence regardless of what we do. Derek looked at Victoria one final time. Victoria, I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this because I forgive you or because I still care about you. I'm doing this because bringing down your mother's entire criminal enterprise serves justice better than simply destroying you individually. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. Patricia, draft an agreement. Victoria provides full cooperation, complete testimony, and all financial records in her possession. In exchange, I won't oppose her plea bargain request, but I won't actively support it either. She gets no special consideration from me. She lives or dies by the value of her cooperation to federal prosecutors. As Victoria signed the agreement with shaking hands, Derek felt a cold satisfaction. Eleanor Whitmore would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Victoria would face serious consequences, but might avoid the worst punishment through her cooperation. And Derek Stone would emerge from this war not as a victim, but as the man who'd exposed one of the largest financial conspiracies in South Carolina history. The game was almost over, and Derek had achieved something beyond simple revenge. He'd achieved justice on a scale that would reverberate through Charleston's power structure for years to come. Chapter 7. The Empire Falls. 6 months after Eleanor Whitmore's arrest at Charleston Executive Airport, Derek Stone sat in a federal courtroom watching the final chapter of his war unfold. Eleanor faced the judge in an orange jumpsuit, her silver hair now gray and thin, her aristocratic bearing replaced by the defeated posture of someone who'd lost everything. The charges read like a catalog of white-collar crime: money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. The investigation Derek had triggered had grown beyond anyone's imagination, ultimately exposing what federal prosecutors called the largest organized financial crime syndicate in South Carolina history. Victoria sat in the witness box, her testimony having already helped convict 3 prominent Charleston politicians, 2 judges, and a dozen wealthy families who'd used Eleanor's charity network to hide income and launder money. She looked older, thinner, worn down by months of cooperation with federal authorities. Judge Patricia Williams reviewed the sentencing documents as the courtroom waited in silence. Derek observed from the gallery, noting how different this was from the family dinner where Eleanor had tried to destroy him. No crystal chandelier, no expensive wine, no audience of sycophantic relatives, just cold fluorescent lights and the weight of justice. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore, Judge Williams began, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. You have been convicted on 37 counts involving financial crimes totaling over $43 million stolen from charitable organizations, tax evasion schemes, and money laundering operations spanning 15 years. Derek had to admit he was impressed despite himself. Eleanor's criminal enterprise had been far more sophisticated than he'd initially realized. She'd turned Charleston's charity circuit into a money laundering operation that served wealthy criminals across the Southeast. The victims of your crimes include veterans organizations, children's hospitals, arts programs, and historical preservation societies, institutions that depend on charitable donations to serve the community, Judge Williams continued. You stole from the most vulnerable members of society to enrich yourself and your criminal associates. Eleanor's attorney made a final plea for mercy, citing her age and health, but Judge Williams was unmoved. Mrs. Whitmore, you showed no mercy to the children who needed medical care, the veterans who needed support, or the artists who needed funding. This court will show you the same consideration you showed them. 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Full restitution of $43.7 million, plus penalties and interest. All assets to be seized and liquidated to compensate victims. Derek watched Eleanor's face as the sentence was pronounced. For a brief moment, her mask slipped completely, and he saw raw terror in her eyes. She was 73 years old. This was a life sentence, and she knew it. As federal marshals led Eleanor away, Derek felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The war was over, and he'd won more completely than he'd ever imagined possible. But victory came with its own burdens. Outside the courthouse, Amy Walsh approached Derek for what had become a regular ritual. Their partnership had been mutually beneficial. Her reporting had kept the story in the national spotlight, while Derek's insider knowledge had given her exclusive access to one of the biggest corruption scandals in South Carolina history. Mr. Stone, any final thoughts on today's sentencing? Derek considered his words carefully. Ms. Walsh, when this began, I was a man dealing with his wife's betrayal and his mother-in-law's attempt to destroy his reputation. I never imagined it would lead to exposing a criminal conspiracy of this magnitude. Do you feel vindicated? I feel that justice was served. Eleanor Whitmore believed her wealth and social status put her above the law. She was wrong. What about your ex-wife? Victoria received 5 years with the possibility of parole in 2.5 years due to her cooperation. Some people think that's too lenient. Derek's expression hardened slightly. Victoria made her choices, and she's facing the consequences. Her cooperation helped recover millions of dollars in stolen funds and put dangerous criminals in prison. The justice system determined her sentence, not me. That evening, Derek returned to his new home, a modern house overlooking Charleston Harbor that he'd purchased with proceeds from his book deal and the documentary rights to his story. The old house he'd shared with Victoria had been sold, every trace of their life together erased. Margaret Shun had helped him pack, and she'd made an observation that stuck with him. Mr. Stone, you could have destroyed them quietly, privately. Why did you choose to make it so public? Derek had thought about that question often. Because private destruction allows the system that created them to continue. Public destruction sends a message to everyone else who thinks wealth and connections make them untouchable. As Derek sat on his new deck, overlooking the harbor where Charleston's history began, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized but hadn't expected to see. Hello, Derek. Victoria's voice was tentative, uncertain. Victoria, I thought you were at the federal facility in Atlanta. I am. They allow supervised phone calls for inmates who are cooperating with ongoing investigations. She paused. Derek, I wanted to tell you something before I lost the courage. Derek waited, saying nothing. I know you'll never forgive me. I know I destroyed everything good between us, and I know I deserve everything that happened. But I wanted you to know that you were right about me, about my family, about everything. What do you mean? I mean I was a spoiled, selfish person who took everything for granted. I never appreciated what we had, never appreciated you, until it was too late. Her voice was shaking. My mother raised me to believe that people like you were temporary, that marriage was just another social arrangement that could be changed when it became inconvenient. Derek remained silent, letting her continue. But you weren't temporary, were you? You were the real thing. And I threw it away for someone who didn't matter, someone who disappeared the moment things got difficult. Victoria was crying now. I lost the only man who ever really loved me, and I helped my mother try to destroy you. I hate myself for that, Derek. I hate what I became. Victoria. No, let me finish. You were a better person than any of us deserved. You could have destroyed me completely, could have made sure I went to prison for 20 years, but you didn't. Even after everything I did to you, you still had more integrity than I'd ever had. Derek felt something he hadn't expected, a moment of sadness for the woman Victoria might have been if she'd been raised differently, if she'd chosen differently, if she'd never betrayed him. I'm glad you understand that now, Victoria. I hope it helps you become a better person. Derek, do you think, maybe someday, after I've served my time and proved I've changed, do you think we could ever be friends again? Not married, not romantic, just friends. Derek's answer came without hesitation. No, Victoria. We can never be friends. What you did to me, what you and your mother tried to do to me, isn't something friendship can survive. Some betrayals are permanent. He could hear her sobbing on the other end of the line. I wish you well, Victoria. I hope you find peace and become the person you should have been all along. But you and I are finished forever. Derek hung up the phone and sat quietly as the sun set over Charleston Harbor. He'd achieved total victory in his war against the Whitmores. But victory had required him to become someone harder, colder, more ruthless than he'd been before. The man who'd loved Victoria unconditionally was gone, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals could never be forgiven, some relationships could never be repaired. The final chapter of Derek Stone's war was yet to be written, but one thing was certain. He would never again be vulnerable to the kind of betrayal that had started this entire campaign. He'd learned that mercy was often mistaken for weakness, that forgiveness could be seen as permission to transgress again. Derek Stone had become exactly what his enemies had forced him to become, a man without mercy for those who betrayed him, a man who never forgot and never forgave. And in Charleston's elite circles, that reputation would serve him well for the rest of his life. Chapter 8. New Foundations. 2 years after Eleanor Whitmore's sentencing, Derek Stone had become something he'd never intended to be, a symbol. Veterans groups invited him to speak about standing up to corruption. Fraud investigators sought his expertise on financial crimes. Publishers competed for his next book deal. He'd inadvertently built a career out of the destruction of his marriage. Derek's security firm, Apex Protection, had grown exponentially. His reputation for ruthless thoroughness in exposing corruption attracted clients from across the Southeast. Politicians vetted their opponents through his firm. Corporations hired him to investigate suspected embezzlement. Wealthy individuals sought his services when they suspected their spouses of adultery. He'd become the man you called when you needed someone destroyed professionally and legally. On a humid Thursday morning in July, Derek sat in his expanded office reviewing a case file when his assistant announced an unexpected visitor. Margaret Chin stood in his doorway, looking older but somehow more at peace than she had during her years with the Whitmores. "Mr. Stone, I hope you don't mind me stopping by without an appointment." "Margaret, you're always welcome here. Please, sit down." Derek gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How are you adjusting to retirement?" Margaret had received a substantial reward from the federal government for her assistance in the Whitmore investigation. She'd used the money to buy a small house near the coast and was reportedly writing a memoir about her years working for Charleston's elite families. "I'm doing well, thank you. But I'm here about something concerning." Margaret's expression grew serious. "Mr. Stone, Victoria is being released from federal prison next month." Derek felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest. "I see. Early release for good behavior and cooperation." "Yes, but that's not why I'm here." Margaret leaned forward. "Mr. Stone, Victoria's been writing to you. Letters that were intercepted by prison officials because they violated the restraining order you obtained." Derek's jaw tightened. The restraining order had been Patricia Voss's idea, designed to prevent Victoria from contacting him during her incarceration. "What kind of letters?" "Obsessive ones. She's convinced herself that what happened was all her mother's fault, that you and she were victims of Eleanor's manipulation. She believes that once she's free, you two can reconcile." Derek stood and walked to his window, looking out at Charleston's bustling downtown. "Margaret, Victoria made her choices. She wasn't a victim. She was a willing participant in everything that happened. I know that, and you know that. But Victoria has spent 2 years in prison creating a fantasy where she's the wronged party, where her mother forced her into the affair and the financial crimes." Margaret's voice carried a note of warning. "Mr. Stone, I think she's planning to contact you directly once she's released. The restraining order will expire automatically unless you renew it. And even if you do, Victoria comes from a family that believed rules didn't apply to them. Prison may have changed her circumstances, but I don't think it changed her fundamental nature." Derek considered this information. He'd assumed Victoria's chapter in his life was closed, that her prison sentence would give her time to accept reality and move on. Apparently, he'd been wrong. "What exactly are you suggesting, Margaret?" "I'm suggesting you need to be prepared for Victoria to re-enter your life, whether you want her to or not. And I'm suggesting she may not be as reformed as her prison counselors believe." That afternoon, Derek called Patricia Voss to discuss renewing the restraining order. Patricia had since become one of Charleston's most prominent divorce attorneys, largely due to the publicity from the Whitmore case. "Derek, I can certainly renew the order, but Margaret's right to be concerned. Victoria's letters suggest someone who hasn't accepted responsibility for her actions. She's created a narrative where she's the victim, and that's dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because people who see themselves as victims feel justified in taking extreme actions to correct the injustice they believe they've suffered." Patricia's voice carried professional concern. "Derek, in my experience, The most dangerous ex-spouses are the ones who refuse to accept that the relationship is over. That evening, Derek reviewed the security at his home and office. He'd maintained military-grade security systems since the beginning of his war with the Whitmores, but complacency was dangerous. He updated his protocols, briefed his staff, and made sure his personal protection measures were current. But Derek's real concern wasn't his physical safety. It was the possibility that Victoria might try to rehabilitate herself publicly by claiming she'd been manipulated and abused. The narrative of the wronged wife seeking reconciliation with her noble husband could be appealing to a media that loved redemption stories. Derek wouldn't allow Victoria to rewrite history or claim victim status for choices she'd made freely. 2 weeks later, Derek's concerns proved justified. Amy Walsh called with disturbing news. Derek, Victoria Whitmore was released from prison yesterday. She's already reached out to 3 different media outlets offering to tell her real story about the scandal and her marriage to you. What kind of real story? The kind where she was an abused wife controlled by a domineering mother and manipulated into an affair by a predatory tennis instructor. The kind where she spent 2 years in prison reflecting on her mistakes and is now ready to rebuild her life with the man she never stopped loving. Derek's laugh was cold. She's trying to manipulate public opinion. It's more than that, Derek. She's hired a publicist and a crisis management firm. This isn't just about rehabilitation. She's planning a full media campaign to rewrite the narrative of what happened. Derek hung up the phone and sat quietly in his study, thinking through the implications. Victoria was attempting something audacious. She was trying to transform herself from villain to victim, to claim that her crimes and betrayals were the result of abuse and manipulation rather than selfish choices. Derek had spent 2 years building a reputation as someone who exposed corruption and held criminals accountable. Victoria was now threatening to undermine that reputation by claiming he'd been the real villain all along. But Victoria had made a crucial mistake. She was fighting Derek Stone on his own territory, the realm of public opinion and media manipulation. And Derek had become very good at that kind of warfare. Derek made a series of phone calls that evening, activating a network of contacts he'd built over the past 2 years. Journalists who'd covered the original story, federal prosecutors who'd worked the case, fellow veterans who understood the importance of accountability. If Victoria wanted a media war, Derek would give her one. But this time, he had every advantage: credibility, evidence, public support, and 2 years of experience in managing his public image. Victoria Whitmore was about to learn that Derek Stone had evolved since their divorce. The man she was trying to manipulate was far more dangerous than the husband she'd betrayed. The final battle of their war was about to begin, and Derek intended to finish what Victoria had started once and for all. Chapter 9. The Final Move. Victoria's media campaign launched exactly 1 week after her release from federal prison. She appeared on a morning talk show wearing a simple blue dress, her hair styled conservatively, speaking in soft, measured tones about her journey of redemption and the mistakes that had led to her incarceration. Derek watched the interview from his office, accompanied by Patricia Voss and Amy Walsh. They observed as Victoria skillfully portrayed herself as a victim of psychological manipulation, first by her controlling mother, then by the predatory Trevor Ashford, and finally by a criminal justice system that had failed to recognize her victimization. I was raised in an environment where I never learned to think for myself, Victoria told the sympathetic host. My mother controlled every aspect of my life, including my marriage. When I tried to find some independence, some sense of self, I made terrible choices. But I was vulnerable, manipulated by men who took advantage of my confusion. The host nodded sympathetically. And what about your ex-husband, Derek Stone? He's been portrayed as the hero in this story, the decorated veteran who exposed corruption. What's your perspective on that? Victoria's expression grew sad, vulnerable. Derek is a good man, but he's also someone trained in psychological warfare, trained to gather intelligence and manipulate situations to his advantage. When our marriage hit a rough patch, instead of seeking counseling or trying to work things out, he used his skills to destroy me and my family. Derek's jaw clenched as he watched Victoria's performance. She was good, very good. Her story was crafted to appeal to anyone who'd ever felt powerless, anyone who'd ever made mistakes they regretted. She's rewriting the entire narrative, Patricia observed, making herself the victim and you the villain. Amy was already taking notes. Derek, we need to respond to this immediately. If this story gains traction, it could seriously damage your reputation and your business. But Derek remained calm, watching Victoria continue her performance. He'd anticipated this moment, planned for it. Victoria was making the same mistake she'd made 2 years ago. She was underestimating him. Let her finish, Derek said quietly. Let her commit fully to her new narrative. Over the next 3 days, Victoria appeared on 2 more television shows and gave interviews to 4 different publications. Her story remained consistent. She was a woman who'd been controlled and manipulated her entire life, who'd made mistakes while seeking independence, and who'd been destroyed by a vengeful ex-husband who'd used his military training and professional skills to orchestrate her downfall. The story gained traction. Social media buzzed with discussions about domestic psychological abuse, about the power dynamics in marriages between strong men and sheltered women, about whether Derek Stone had gone too far in his quest for revenge. Some veterans groups began questioning their support for Derek. Women's advocacy organizations started viewing Victoria as a potential poster child for subtle forms of domestic abuse. Derek's speaking engagements were quietly canceled, and 2 major clients postponed their contracts pending the outcome of the controversy. Victoria's strategy was working. On Thursday morning, Derek held a press conference. The media turnout was substantial. Reporters from national networks, local journalists, bloggers, and social media influencers all gathered in the conference room at Derek's office. Derek took the podium wearing his best suit, his military bearing evident, his expression serious but controlled. He looked every inch the decorated veteran and successful businessman he'd become. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this press conference to address the recent claims made by my ex-wife, Victoria Whitmore Stone, regarding our marriage and the subsequent criminal investigation that led to her conviction and imprisonment. Derek paused, allowing the cameras to capture his composure. Mrs. Stone has claimed that she was a victim of psychological manipulation and domestic abuse during our marriage. She suggested that I used my military training and professional skills to control and ultimately destroy her. These claims are serious, and they deserve a serious response. Derek gestured to Patricia Voss, who handed him a thick folder. This folder contains documentation that will refute every claim Mrs. Stone has made. But before I present this evidence, I want to say something about the nature of accountability and consequences. Derek's voice carried clearly through the silent room. 2 years ago, Mrs. Stone participated in a scheme to publicly humiliate me, steal my assets, and destroy my reputation. When that scheme failed, she and her mother escalated to criminal activity, charity fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion totaling over $40 million. These weren't mistakes made by a confused, manipulated woman. These were deliberate criminal acts committed by someone who believed her wealth and social status put her above the law. Derek opened the folder and began displaying documents on the screens behind him. These are financial records showing Mrs. Stone's systematic theft from 3 charitable organizations over a 2-year period. These thefts began before her affair with Trevor Ashford, contradicting her claim that she was driven to crime by emotional confusion. The next set of documents appeared on screen. These are recorded conversations between Mrs. Stone and Mr. Ashford, discussing their plans to manipulate divorce proceedings to maximize Mrs. Stone's financial gain. In these conversations, Mrs. Stone displays detailed knowledge of financial fraud and money laundering techniques that she claims to have learned from her mother. Derek's voice grew harder. These recordings also contain Mrs. Stone's own words describing me as too trusting and easy to manipulate because of my military Boy Scout mentality. She and Mr. Ashford laugh about how I had no idea what they were planning. The room buzzed with murmurs as reporters reviewed the evidence. Derek continued relentlessly. But the most damaging evidence isn't financial, it's personal. New documents appeared on screen, emails, text messages, social media posts. These communications show Mrs. Stone's affairs weren't limited to Trevor Ashford. Over the 3 years of our marriage, she had intimate relationships with at least 6 different men, including 2 married men whose wives remained unaware of their husbands' infidelity. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in real time. Mrs. Stone has portrayed herself as a sheltered, manipulated woman who made mistakes while seeking independence. The evidence shows someone who deliberately deceived multiple people, stole money from charities that helped children and veterans, and participated in organized criminal activity for personal gain. Derek's final move was devastating. Mrs. Stone claims she wants reconciliation, that she spent 2 years in prison reflecting on her mistakes, and is ready to rebuild our relationship. But these are the letters she wrote to me while incarcerated, letters that violated the restraining order and had to be intercepted by federal authorities. The projected images showed page after page of increasingly obsessive letters. Victoria's handwriting grew more erratic as the letters progressed, her claims more grandiose, her threats more explicit. In these letters, Mrs. Stone doesn't take responsibility for her crimes. Instead, she blames me for destroying her life, threatens to make me pay for what I've done to her family, and describes elaborate fantasies about forcing me to admit the truth about our marriage. Derek closed the folder and faced the cameras directly. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria Stone isn't a victim seeking redemption. She's a convicted criminal who refuses to accept responsibility for her actions and is now attempting to manipulate public opinion to rehabilitate her image and potentially pursue further harassment of her ex-husband. The room erupted in questions, but Derek held up his hand for silence. I have one final statement. Mrs. Stone, if you're watching this, understand that your attempts to rewrite history have failed. The evidence of your crimes is overwhelming and permanent. Your claims of victimization are contradicted by your own words and actions. Your fantasy of reconciliation is never going to become reality. Derek's voice carried the full authority of someone who'd fought and won battles that mattered. You declared war on me 2 years ago. I won that war completely and decisively. If you choose to continue this conflict, you will lose again, just as thoroughly as you lost before. I suggest you focus on rebuilding your life away from Charleston, away from me, and away from the cameras. Derek left the podium without taking questions, but the evidence he'd presented spoke for itself. By evening, the story had shifted completely. Victoria's victim narrative collapsed under the weight of documentation, recorded conversations, and evidence of ongoing criminal thinking. The media that had initially shown sympathy for Victoria now portrayed her as a manipulative ex-convict attempting to gaslight the public. Women's advocacy groups distanced themselves from her story once they saw evidence of her multiple affairs and deliberate criminal activity. Veterans organizations reaffirmed their support for Derek. Victoria's publicist and crisis management firm dropped her as a client within 48 hours. 3 days later, Derek received a call from Detective Morrison. Derek, Victoria Stone was arrested this morning attempting to enter your neighborhood. She was carrying a handgun and had materials suggesting she was planning to confront you directly. Derek felt no surprise, only a cold satisfaction that his instincts had been correct. What are the charges? Violation of the restraining order, illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and attempted stalking. With her criminal history, she's looking at 5 to 10 years in state prison. Derek hung up the phone and sat quietly in his study. Victoria had made her final move, and like all her previous moves, it had been predictable, reckless, and ultimately self-destructive. Derek Stone had built a new life from the ashes of his betrayal. He'd become successful, respected, and powerful in ways he'd never imagined. He'd exposed corruption, helped recover stolen funds, and built a reputation for integrity and ruthless competence. Victoria Whitmore Stone had emerged from federal prison worse than when she'd entered, more delusional, more dangerous, and now facing additional criminal charges that would keep her incarcerated for most of the rest of her life. The war that began with Eleanor Whitmore's declaration that Derek was dead weight had ended with Eleanor dying in federal prison and Victoria returning to prison for crimes committed in her obsessive pursuit of a man who would never forgive her betrayal. Derek Stone had achieved something beyond revenge. He'd achieved justice so complete and decisive that it would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider crossing him. In Charleston's elite circles, Derek's reputation was now unassailable. He was the man who'd brought down one of the city's most powerful families, who'd exposed massive corruption, and who'd emerged stronger from every attempt to destroy him. Most importantly, Derek had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Mercy was often mistaken for weakness. Forgiveness could be seen as permission to transgress again, and some betrayals were so fundamental that they changed the nature of a person forever. Derek Stone would never again be the trusting husband who'd been blindsided by betrayal. He'd become something harder, more dangerous, and ultimately more successful. A man who never forgot, never forgave, and never lost. The war was over, and Derek Stone had won everything that mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.